I'm Mary Beth Sewald, President and CEO of the Vegas Chamber. And the Vegas Chamber is doing our annual Washington, D.C. fly-in this week. We're all virtual this time around, and we're so sorry that we can't be in Washington, D.C. in person. But we are really excited to have the luxury of the technology because we get to talk to people like Harold Kim, who is the president of the U.S. Chamber Institute for Legal Reform. Harold, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Mary Beth.
Well, we really appreciate everything that you do at the U.S. Chamber, and we just know that you work so hard on behalf of all the chambers across the country and also businesses across the country. So we're here today to talk about the legal climate. Can you tell us a little bit about where Nevada ranks in the legal climate?
Sure. Well, we do a survey every 2 years, which is a perception poll of over 1,300 in-house corporate counsel with familiarity of any particular state. And they are asked questions about how is that state's legal system? How are your judges? How are your juries? How are the laws on the books? And Nevada, in our most recent poll, came out at number 29, which is sort of in the middle of the pack. And it's one of their better rankings from years past. But there are still some problematic areas that I think the survey shows.
Can you tell us what some of those problematic areas are?
Yeah, I think that some of the more negative feedback areas involved your trial court judges, the competency of the judges, also the impartiality of your juries. And I think some of that is spelled out in these nuclear verdicts that we've seen coming out of Clark County. Slip and fall cases generating $16 million verdicts. And then, of course, several years ago, there was a $500 million verdict that came out of Clark County involving a pharmaceutical manufacturer, despite the fact that there were some particularly strong defenses on their side.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. I know sometimes in Nevada, we kind of complain a little bit because we're at the top of the bad list and at the bottom of the good list, but being in the middle, I guess it could be worse.
Well, yeah, I think that in 2015, you created an intermediate court of appeals, which now bridges any of these disputes between the trial courts and your state Supreme Court. And that usually is a good reform because having more judges telling the regulated community or the lawyers basically what is the state of law provides a little more certainty. So I think that's been helpful, but obviously when it comes to legal reform, it is never a one and done. You've got to constantly commit to it.
Right. Okay. Well, speaking of legal reform, limited liability and has been something that the Vegas Chamber has been working on a statewide level. And of course, we're very interested in what's happening on the federal level. We want to protect businesses from frivolous COVID lawsuits, of course, and especially the ones who are working really hard to abide by some of the CDC rules and things like that and protect their workers and their patrons. So can you give us an idea of what's the status at the federal level on limited liability legislation?
Yeah, sure. And first, I want to commend the Vegas Chamber for the work that you've done this year to get COVID liability protections in the state of Nevada. You're one of over 30 states that have acted legislatively or through executive orders. But we think an important complement to what the states are doing would be federal legislation, which would establish a floor for liability protections covering exposure claims, covering product liability, covering medical liability, and a comprehensive piece of legislation that's actually been considered in the U.S. Senate. Just last week, there was a vote on a Phase 4 economic stimulus bill that Leader Mitch McConnell, had put up for a vote. He needed 60 votes. He didn't get the 60 votes, but nonetheless got a majority of the senators. And there's very strong liability language in there, which again would complement some of the things that have happened in Nevada or in other pockets of the country. Right now, despite last week's vote, we were encouraged just yesterday by a group of House and Democratic House Republicans and House Democrats coming together as part of this Problem Solvers Caucus to come up with a modified approach to a Phase 4 economic recovery bill. How do you deal with unemployment benefits? How do you deal with more funding for state and local governments in addition to K through 12 education? But it also included liability protections. Now, we haven't seen the actual language, but there is definitely bipartisan interest in the House that has been getting a lot of headlines lately. and it's gotten the attention of Speaker Pelosi and Steny Hoyer. So, as we barrel down towards the end of this month, there is a action forcing event in terms of continuing to fund the government, which on paper expires on September 30th. And so, hopefully there's an opening for a bipartisan deal to come together when it comes to the appropriations process, but also another relief package in the wake of this global pandemic.
Well, and that's a great update. And, here in Nevada, we've had some statewide legislators talk about, we don't want to protect the bad actors. So we always, of course, want to protect workers and patrons and so forth. But having the ability to protect the businesses who are really trying to follow the guidelines and going over above and beyond, a lot of them are. And so those are the ones we're really trying to make sure we look out for. So thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, the legislation that we have been recommending at the state and at the federal level are really hitting three hallmarks. One is it has to be timely, it has to be targeted, and it should be temporary. And the proposals that policymakers are considering are very well balanced. They offer the appropriate safeguards. There would be exceptions for gross negligence or willful misconduct, but it would give the certainty to business owners that as they reopen, as they re-engage in the economy, they're not going to get hit with a class action lawsuit that can drive them out of business.
Well, Harold, thank you again so much for your time today. Thank you for always participating with us at the Vegas Chamber, and thanks for all you do at the U.S. Chamber on behalf of business.
Thank you, Mary Beth. Have a great day.
All right, you too. And for all the latest details of the Vegas Chamber's Washington, D.C. fly-in, you can follow us at vegaschamber.com or on social media at LV Chamber and hashtag DC in LV. Thanks again.